brilliant blue sky, the hot summer sun, sand between your toes, cold ocean water. There's just something about the ocean that I have fond memories of. Maybe you do too. There's just something about it that draws us to it. And I've lived here in Nova Scotia almost my entire life. And I'm pretty sure you've heard this said before, that no matter where you are in Nova Scotia, you're no more than 57 kilometers from the ocean. Or, as you might get it described to you, you're probably less than a half hour's drive from some of the 7,500 kilometers of coastline. And we all know how the value of oceanfront and ocean view properties have exploded, skyrocketed in value in the last 20-some years. And with climate change and extreme weather events becoming more top of mind, this is a topic I wanted to think about. I wanted to talk about the Coastal Protection Act. Hi, my name is Sheldon MacLeod. This is my podcast, Thinking Out Loud, brought to you by SaltWire, where you can get unlimited digital access for a year for just $20. SaltWire.com, powered by the amazing journalists at the Chronicle Herald. Now let's go back to this exchange from the Nova Scotia Legislature, October 25th, 2023. The Coastal Protection Act had received third reading back in April of 2019, but the regulations have not been put into place, which would allow for this act to be proclaimed law here in Nova Scotia. The first voice you hear is NDP MLA Lisa Lachance.
Madam Speaker, my question is for the Premier. Yesterday, dozens of Nova Scotians joined the Ecology Action Centre to call on the government to bring the Coastal Protection Act into force. They describe the government's delays as recklessly irresponsible, and I'll table that. This act was passed with all party support, including by the Conservatives, who have inexplicably held the act into its fourth year of delay. Madam Speaker, can the Premier see that his irresponsible delays are leaving people and communities at risk in the face of increasing extreme weather?
I recognize the Honourable Minister for Environment and Climate Change.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I'd like to thank the Honourable Member for the question. Look, I do not see this as being irresponsible in any way. Listening and getting the authentic feedback of individuals who are mostly impacted by coastal erosion, that input is absolutely critical, and that's why we were undergoing a targeted consultation to 40,000 coastal property owners. Madam Speaker, I look forward to the feedback that we receive. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
I recognize the Honourable Member for Halifax Citadel Sable Island.
Madam Speaker, documents released under Freedom of Information show that the regulations were complete, waiting for Cabinet approval when the Minister ordered more consultations, and I'll table that. The majority of the submissions to these consultations, as well as hundreds of people who write to all of our offices, urge the government to enact the Act, except for a few, and I quote, "The handful of most vocal concerns contained in the documents came from people working for real estate companies or looking to buy or sell land." Will the Minister come clean about the real interest he is trying to protect in delaying the Coastal Protection Act?
I recognize the Honourable Minister of Environment and Climate Change.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Look, the interest we're trying to protect is Nova Scotians. And, Madam Speaker, in the previous rounds of consultations, we got feedback from municipalities and specialists and engineers. Great feedback we appreciate, but we didn't get a response. We didn't get clarity from coastal property owners. The opposition may choose not to listen. On this side of the House, Madam Speaker, the government listens. Thank you.
Now keep that in mind. We're going to get back to that a little later on, as in the big question. Why haven't these regulations been put into place yet? Now, Environment Minister Tim Halman, the Progressive Conservatives, the NDP, all supported the previous Liberal government of Iain Rankin in passing the Coastal Protection Act several years ago. And the consultation with landowners that the minister described had just finished up at midnight, November 7th this year. Still no word on when it's going to become law. So why do we even need this legislation? That's a question I put to retired Dalhousie University planning professor Patricia Manuel. when the government said this is legislation aimed at protecting the province's coastline and homes by restricting property owners, that sounds fairly clear as to what the government is intending to use this bill for. What do you see as the main reason to have a Coastal Protection Act in Nova Scotia?
Okay, I need clarification on that. Did they stop the sentence at saying restricted property owners, or did they continue to say restricting them from what?
And it says more about, here's some things that you need to know, go online and look it up.
Okay, was that the current government?
Yeah, this was from the Conservative Government's
yeah.
Communications Department and the Department of Environment.
Okay, so when you hear that, it sounds a bit ominous, doesn't it? Which is really unfortunate, because the bill is not intended to be, the regulations are not intended to be ominous in the way that one might interpret that statement. So the way we've seen, and in fact the way it was sort of originally described, if you could find that now on the website, which you can't, the original description of the regulations was to protect people from the coast and coast from the people, or vice versa, right? In other words, there are coastal processes like flooding and erosion, those are the main ones, which are normal processes, albeit these days with stronger storms, of course, things are accelerating, becoming exacerbated, and so if you happen to be very close to the edge of the coastline at the shoreline, it is quite likely that you are going to be impacted by at least flooding if you're in a low-lying area, and if you happen to be on kind of a soft shoreline material, by erosion, more quickly probably than what you had experienced in the past. So it makes sense to get people to stop building in those, hazard-prone locations and move back. We tend to see these processes as hazards, but I think we have to also remember that they're only hazards if we're in the way.
From a planning perspective, what are the pitfalls for rushing ahead with regulation before fully understanding? Is there a caution? Is there a good reason to take your time to get it right?
I think we've got it right, mostly. I mean, they worked on it for 3 years after they proclaimed the Act. The Act is an enabling piece of legislation. So once the Act was in place, then they went ahead and developed the regulations. They didn't just pull them out of the air. These are based on sound scientific analysis of the situation along the Nova Scotia coast with respect to what one might expect for short-term and long-term flooding. It incorporates the sea level rise projections as well as storms, and also considering how diverse our coast is. I mean, we've got a very diverse geology in this province. You can walk, within a kilometre section of shore in the HRM, Halifax Regional Municipality, for example. You're going to see many different types of geology, and they all behave quite differently with respect to erosion. So you have to have a really site-specific analysis to figure out what that means for your property. So the foundations of the Act are based in solid science and an understanding of our coastline, not somewhere else. Like this is not a one-size-fits-all scenario, right?
As recently a year ago, Environment Minister Tim Halman wrote a letter to SaltWire to say that he was ready to get this act in place by 2023. Yeah. And it seems the brakes have been pumped, whatever terminology you want to use. The government said we're going to go back to consult with the particular landowners most affected by this. It's very hard to ascribe a motivation. Why do you feel government isn't moving forward to put in place what was expected to be the regulations for this Coastal Protection Act in 2023? Why do you think they're not doing that?
I can only speculate, and I'm not going to do that. But can
you imagine any legitimate? Qualified and serious reason to not move ahead with this?
Not from my perspective, but I mean, who knows what's behind these decisions at the political level? I have no idea. I'm not a politician, so I don't know what they're up against, right? And I mean, maybe the Conservative government wants to take more time to understand it themselves. I really don't want to speculate on what the reason could be. But we heard the same thing. It would be, by March 31st, the end of that fiscal year, right, 2023. And so it was quite a surprise when they said, no, we're going back to at least part of the drawing board. Now, I don't know landowners, they had as much opportunity as everyone else to participate. I don't know how many actually did identify themselves as landowners and participate. I really don't know. And those most affected, that's an interesting statement, right?
My name is Will Balser. I am the Coastal Adaptation Coordinator with the Ecology Action Centre based at Ushbukduk in Halifax.
Now, the Ecology Action Centre is a not-for-profit society. It's based in Halifax. It's been very effective over its 50-plus years and having influence over environmental policies in this province. And in a lot of ways, it's because they're very persistent and they offer solutions, not just problems. And I asked Will Balser why he thinks the government has been slow to proclaim this act.
It's very hard to say. I mean, we've done a number of FOI pops, and there's no smoking gun that says, yes, it was this developer who called Tim Houston and put the kibosh to the whole situation. But it's very clear that there was some decision made mid-March of this year, wherein, some seemingly from the top down, it changed overnight. They had every intention of releasing and rolling out the act until about mid-March. They had every intention of releasing it at the end of March, as they say in the emails, at the end of fiscal 2023. So, I mean, we don't know exactly what happened. We don't know why the sea change occurred, to use a good term, but it seemingly did, again, overnight, and they completely changed their tone on it. I mean, this wasn't even just internal to Nova Scotia Environment. They had Nova Scotia communication staff on board. They had specific language for how to and who to contact upon rollout of the regulation. So it's really been a mystery to us and everyone else, outside of the department.
So let's go back to that day in question period. The NDP's Lisa Lachance is referring to a Freedom of Information request about who was asking specifically for these regulations to be delayed.
The handful of most vocal concerns contained in the documents came from people working for real estate companies or looking to buy or sell land. Will the minister come clean about the real interests he is trying to protect in delaying the Coastal Protection Act?
Absolutely. In certain circumstances, I fully believe that some people are opposed to it on a monetary value level. But again, I compel them to think even 20 years into the future, never mind what we look at, the end of a century, how long you think a house is going to be in a certain place, how long you expect the lifespan of a building to be versus the erosion rates that we're seeing in some areas that are, barely a foot above sea level and are on largely sandy soil, if not no rock base at all. It may have a certain value at this exact moment where people are still pushing to develop and get to as close to the coastline as possible. But you can't expect that to have an increasing value or even a maintaining value when it's losing over a foot of depth per year. I just don't understand the lack of foresight when it comes to the planning around real estate or developing some of these properties. It feels like getting your foot in the door at the very last minute. Risks be damned.
My name is Chris Melnick. I'm a realtor at Royal LePage Atlantic here in Halifax, Nova Scotia, and I help people buy and sell homes, and quite often I help them buy land.
Now, I found this YouTube video from Chris Melnick talking about the financial implications of the potential regulations on coastal properties. Now, in fairness, some of the assumptions in that video were wrong, and he subsequently took that video offline when he was asked about it. Now, he's very clear on one aspect of the act and his role as a real estate agent.
I do want to point out there, I don't want this to seem like I'm a realtor who's against this because it'll hurt property prices or something along those lines. It's very much that I think these regulations are good, and I just want them to be all kind of fleshed out and put in place. Because it will, the market will change. Some properties will lose value, some properties will gain value, because if there's basically very little erosion risk, then they probably won't face much of a setback. And if you can basically build closer to the ocean safely, those properties are going to be worth more than the ones that where you have to have a greater setback and you're further away from the ocean. So it will change the market. But it's in the best interest of people who are planning to build homes there.
And what does he think about the delay in implementing the regulations?
I mean, what I'd actually prefer, and just for the record, I am in favor of this act. I think we should be protecting the coastline, protected from erosion, things like that. I mean, from my end, I would just be happy that they settle on rules, and because that would cut out the ambiguity. Because that would give me a clear answer. So when I work with buyers, then realistically, what I expect to happen after this does become law is that everybody planning to sell waterfront property would already have these professionals come to site to do their evaluation to say, well, now you can build, you have to be 50 meters away from the water or 60, or maybe it's only 30, but you would have that in writing. So that's a great level of certainty, and it instills confidence in my buyers. So again, to get back to your actual question, what would I want to see? I would just want them to see, I would want them to basically agree on what the regulations are going to be and then put them in law. And basically the market will adjust around that. But at the same time, it'll just give my buyers certainty.
A dozen municipalities across the province and the Ecology Action Centre sent a letter to the Minister of Environment asking him to immediately implement the regulations in the Coastal Protection Act. Again, Will Balser.
The most straightforward thing is implement the act immediately. That's been our demands, and since day one of these, rolling delays year over year at this point. And it's just becoming ludicrous. I think we go through another hurricane season. We got very lucky with Hurricane Lee losing a lot of power just before it made landfall, but we really didn't get very lucky with Hurricane Fiona last year. And that was a small storm comparatively, and it missed Halifax. You can imagine what a storm of comparable power would have done at Halifax if it lined up with their high tide. Look at the destruction of dunes in the North Shore and PEI. That's all you have to see. Again, our ask is straightforward. Implement the act immediately.
And Professor Manuel?
Pass the regulations, please. Get them out there. We don't need another reminder of why we need them. We need to get them released. It was great work that an awful lot of people put an awful lot of effort into, and it's time to see them released. And it's common to undergo, education as soon as the regulations come into place. There's a weaning in period, if you will, an easing in period on these regulations, any regulations, generally speaking. Regulations is the sort of the far end of the tool to plan and manage. Education is at one end and regulation is at the other. But over time, if you're seeing that all of the things that you try to do without regulations are not helping, and people are endangered and the ecosystems are breaking down in some areas, you have to step in and regulate. So, but these ones, like I said, I see it more as a site planning and assessment tool to get people to develop in the right space.
What do you think? I'd love to hear from you. You can email me at sheldon.macleod@saltwire.com and find me on the socials. And remember that you can get unlimited digital access for a year for just $20 at saltwire.com. I'm Sheldon MacLeod. Remember to like and subscribe. It really helps build. And make sure you share this with anyone you think should be thinking out loud.